Tiberius Claudius Nero, better known simply as Tiberius, was Rome's second emperor. Stepping into the colossal shadow of Augustus, born in 42 BCE, he was not destined from the beginning to rule the empire. In fact, his early life was marked more by military service and political maneuvering than by the promise of supreme power. Yet, through a mixture of fate, adoption, and Augustus' careful dynastic planning, Tiberius became the reluctant heir to Rome's vast dominion. When Augustus died in 14 CE, Tiberius assumed the purple robes of emperor. His reign began with promise, a seasoned general, cautious, and not given to reckless extravagance. He seemed the kind of leader who could maintain Rome's stability after the golden age of Augustus. But behind this facade of control lay a man whose personality was deeply troubled, mistrustful, and withdrawn. His reign would not be remembered for glorious conquests or lasting reforms, but instead for fear, paranoia, and above all, scandal. The most infamous of these scandals would center around the island of Capri, a rocky outcrop in the Bay of Naples, where Tiberius retreated in the later years of his life. It was here, according to ancient sources like Suetonius and Tacitus, that the emperor indulged in the darkest corners of human behavior, surrounding himself with cruelty, sexual perversion, and humiliation. Capri, once a retreat of serene beauty, became in rumor and memory a place of nightmares. The decision to leave Rome and govern from Capri shocked many. Emperors were expected to be visible in the capital, presiding over ceremonies, engaging with senators, and projecting authority. But Tiberius, increasingly disillusioned with the Senate and plagued by suspicions of betrayal, withdrew from public life around 26 CE from his villas. Overlooking the glittering sea, he ruled the empire by letter and messenger, leaving daily governance in the hands of administrators like the infamous Sejanus, whose ruthless rise to power further stained Tiberius' legacy. It was during this period of seclusion that the most horrifying stories about Tiberius began to circulate. Suetonius, in his work The 12 Caesars, painted a grotesque picture of the emperor's private indulgences. He wrote of young children being brought to the island and forced into degrading acts for the amusement of the aging ruler. The accounts describe games of cruelty, where innocence was corrupted, and the emperor's desires twisted natural affection into humiliation. Tacitus, though more restrained, hinted at similar excesses, suggesting that Capri had become synonymous with vice and terror. According to these writers, Tiberius devised elaborate spectacles that blended cruelty with sexuality. Servants and slaves, including boys and girls, were said to have been forced into humiliating performances, treated not as humans but as objects of mockery and exploitation. Some accounts speak of grotesque nicknames he gave to his victims, stripping them of dignity while amplifying their shame. The emperor's villa was depicted not as a seat of cultured retreat, but as a private theater of perversion. One of the most enduring stories concerned Tiberius' obsession with young children, an accusation that shocked even Roman society, which often tolerated relationships between older men and adolescents. Suetonius claimed that the emperor kept groups of boys and girls trained to serve his desires in ways that blurred the line between play and cruelty. These stories earned Tiberius the notorious nickname of Caprinius, the goat, a mocking title whispered by his critics. Yet, it is important to remember that much of what we know about Tiberius comes from writers who despise him. Roman historians were often as much storytellers as chroniclers, and scandal sold as well in the ancient world as it does today. Tacitus, for example, was deeply cynical about emperors, and often painted them in the worst possible light to contrast with an imagined moral past. Suetonius thrived on gossip and lurid detail, embellishing rumors into vivid anecdotes that still capture imagination centuries later. So, were these horrific tales about Tiberius true? Or were they exaggerated slanders designed to discredit a withdrawn emperor who had abandoned Rome? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Tiberius was undoubtedly a complicated and often cruel ruler. His reign saw numerous treason trials, political purges, and executions that fostered an atmosphere of paranoia in the capital. His withdrawal to Capri did little to improve his reputation, allowing enemies and critics to imagine the worst about what happened behind closed doors. But whether or not every detail of the sexual horrors attributed to him is accurate, the very persistence of these stories has cemented Tiberius' place in history as one of Rome's most perverse emperors. His retreat to Capri became a symbol, not just of personal vice, but of the dangers of absolute power when unrestrained by accountability or visibility. An emperor who once commanded legions and ruled a vast empire became, in memory, a recluse haunted by excess, debauchery, and cruelty. What makes the story of Tiberius particularly disturbing is the way it forces us to confront the darker sides of empire and power. Roman emperors lived above the law, worshipped as gods, and surrounded by servants trained to obey without question. In such an environment, the line between desire and abuse could vanish almost instantly. If the stories are true, then Tiberius used his power not to lead, but to degrade, not to inspire loyalty, but to instill fear. As the years passed, Capri became less a retreat and more a gilded prison. Tiberius grew increasingly paranoid, sending orders of execution from afar, rarely showing his face in Rome again. Visitors to Capri spoke of unease, whispering that the emperor's presence was oppressive. His eyes sharp with suspicion, his household dominated by secrecy. The tales of cruelty only multiplied, feeding Rome's fascination with what its absent emperor was doing behind the walls of his seaside villa. By the time of his death in 37 CE, Tiberius was hated in Rome. His absence had left the city bitter. His cruelty had alienated senators, and his alleged perversions had poisoned his legacy. Crowds in Rome greeted news of his death with celebration, not mourning. His successor, Caligula, capitalized on this hatred, ensuring that his adoptive grandfather was remembered as a monster rather than a cautious statesman. And so, the story of Tiberius has come down to us through the centuries, woven from threads of fact and rumor, history and scandal. Capri remains forever linked to his name, a place where beauty and darkness collided, where an emperor's retreat became the stage for one of antiquity's most infamous legacies. Tiberius' last decade of life on Capri was shrouded in mystery, but the few glimpses we get from ancient writers paint a grim picture. The emperor who once led Rome's armies with discipline and skill had become a recluse, consumed by suspicion, cruelty, and whispers of perversion. The island, surrounded by cliffs and isolated from the mainland, became not just a retreat but a fortress of secrecy, where only his closest attendants dared to tread. From Capri, Tiberius issued orders that reached deep into Rome. Letters written in his name condemned senators, equestrians, and even family members on charges of treason. His reliance on the Praetorian prefect Lucius Aelius Sejanus gave rise to one of the most infamous episodes of his reign. Sejanus, ambitious and ruthless, used his proximity to the emperor to consolidate power in Rome, orchestrating purges of rivals while Tiberius remained secluded on Capri. But power built on fear is fragile. When rumors reached Tiberius that Sejanus might even be plotting to overthrow him, the emperor struck back. In 31 CE, Sejanus was arrested and executed, along with his family and allies. This purge only reinforced the image of Tiberius as a paranoid tyrant, lashing out from the shadows of his island villa. The stories of sexual depravity that surrounded him were fueled by this atmosphere of secrecy and fear. Rome's people, cut off from their emperor and living under the threat of accusations and executions, filled the void with gossip. Tales of children forced into degrading games, of cruelty disguised as entertainment, and of unspeakable acts within the villa walls gave the capital away. To explain the emperor's absence, Capri became a symbol of corruption, a place where unchecked power consumed both ruler and victim alike. Yet historians continue to debate, were these stories propaganda? After all, Roman history was often written by senators who hated emperors for undermining their authority. Tiberius, who withdrew from the city and dismissed the Senate as corrupt and ineffectual, made himself an easy target for character assassination. Writers like Suetonius relished scandal, weaving gossip into narratives that have shaped our understanding of emperors for centuries. Tacitus, ever cynical, presented Tiberius as a man whose talents were poisoned by bitterness and secrecy. The truth is likely complex. Tiberius was not a madman in the way later emperors like Caligula or Nero were remembered, but he was undoubtedly harsh, withdrawn, and increasingly cruel in his judgments. His sexuality, shrouded in scandal, may have been exaggerated, yet the very persistence of the rumor suggests that the emperor had, at the very least, cultivated an image of excess and vice, whether intentionally or not. What cannot be denied is the effect these stories had on his legacy. When Tiberius finally died in 37 CE, at the age of 77, his passing was met with relief, even celebration. Ancient accounts claim that when the news first reached Rome, there was confusion. Some thought he had recovered, others spread word of his death in the Senate. Men cheered openly. The people, weary of his absence and fearful of his cruelty, rejoiced in the streets. The circumstances of his death remain uncertain. Some sources suggest that he died naturally of old age. Others hint at darker possibilities, that his successor Caligula or the Praetorian Guard smothered the frail emperor when it seemed he might linger too long, whether natural or violent. The death of Tiberius symbolized the end of an era, closing a chapter of Rome's early imperial history marked by suspicion and scandal. His legacy was quickly cemented not by his military achievements or administrative caution, but by the stories of Capri. The villa of Jupiter, perched on cliffs above the sea, became forever linked with tales of vice and cruelty. His enemies ensured that the nickname the Goat followed him into history, turning the image of the emperor into a grotesque caricature of lust and excess. Yet modern historians caution us not to accept these stories uncritically. Some see Tiberius as a tragic figure, a capable general and administrator whose personal bitterness and reclusiveness gave his enemies an opportunity to destroy his reputation. Others argue that, even if exaggerated, the rumors point to real abuses of power, highlighting how absolute authority in Rome could twist morality beyond recognition. In the end, whether Tiberius truly indulged in the horrors described or whether his name was blackened by political propaganda, his story reminds us of the dangers of unchecked power, the isolation of Capri, the paranoia of the emperor, and the cruelty attributed to him reveal how distance from accountability can turn rulers into monsters in the eyes of their people. Tiberius' reign is a haunting reminder that history is not only shaped by what leaders do, but also by how they are remembered. Fact and rumor, truth and scandal, blur together until even centuries later, we are left questioning what really happened behind the walls of his villa. Was Tiberius truly the most perverse emperor in Roman history? Or was he a man destroyed by the whispers of his enemies? The fascination endures because the line is so hard to draw, and in that uncertainty lies the enduring power of the story of Tiberius on Capri. A tale of power, isolation, and the terrifying potential for cruelty when one man holds dominion over an empire. If you are intrigued by these dark chapters of ancient history, and want to explore more stories of emperors, tyrants, and the hidden horrors of the past, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who love history, and subscribe to Torture's Room for more deep dives into the world's most chilling tales. History is not always glorious. Sometimes, it is a mirror reflecting humanity's darkest impulses.